Okay, the inverse cosine function. So now let's examine this cosine function. Can it have an inverse function? Yes, but we're going to again have to restrict that domain. So we're going to be restricting that domain. Now we can't go between pi over 2, negative pi over 2 and pi over 2, because if we did that, we're going to, again, this is not a one-to-one function, and we're not going to be hitting those negative values. So for the cosine function, we actually restrict it between 0 and pi. So for example, if we had to find the cosine of pi equal -1, if we reversed this and wrote this as an inverse, it would be the cosine inverse of -1. So there's your output. What angle gives us that? Pi. So again, if we're restricting that domain, we're going to be using just this portion of the graph from 0 to pi so that we can have a one-to-one function. So for the cosine inverse, you can only input values between -1 and 1, and your range is between 0 and 1. So if we had to find a calculator to find cosine of 0.5 and round it to 2 decimal places, so this again, you don't see a degree symbol here, so that means that we're in terms of radians. So you would put this in, cosine of 0.5, there's our angle, and that gives us 0.88. So now if we had to reverse this, the cosine of 0.88, cosine inverse of 0.88 is 0.5. Okay, so evaluate the cosine inverse of -√3/2. So the cosine inverse is restricted between 0 and pi. So again, this is different than the sine inverse. So when I'm looking here, -√3/2, cosine inverse deals with the y value, or cosine deals with the x value. So we can see here we get that x value here, and the angle that gives us that is 5 pi over 6. Evaluate the cosine inverse of 1.25. Well, we don't even have to do anything. We know this is going to be undefined, and that's because on that previous page we said that the domain of the cosine inverse function has to be between -1 and 1, which this is not. The other way to think about it is there any angle that's going to give us a value larger than 1? Well, no, because if you look at the cosine graph, the largest value is 1, the smallest value is -1. So there's no angle that'll give you 1.25.